So, the nice thing about Aileron being immune to both Frozen Doom and Wall of Bones is that it becomes almost impossible for the party to become completely trapped. Like, if the entire party is ever under the effects of those two spells, the battle ends instantly as a failure case, because none of the heroes can act. It is still possible for this to happen with Web of Starlight, because that spell is unaffected, but Web of Starlight can also wear off on its own, as we've gone over before. So, in this way, the trapping moves are balanced both against each other and made such that they aren't too broken for the heroes or the monsters. Like, you could roll with a party of all Solars, and you'll be more at risk of Wall of Bones, because all of your characters can get trapped by those enemies. But the opposite is also true. If you're running with all Lunars, you're more at risk of Frozen Doom casters like Gorgons. And in either scenario, you will always have Aileron as a backup to not get frozen or walled. And I think that's fair. Especially with how many times I've had those spells end my runs prematurely. I mean, you always save, but you know, it's annoying having to go back to your saves and stuff. Okay. I think this side of the valley is cleared. I always forget that this place is smaller than it seems. Like, the Jundor Gate was just over that hill, and that's the Harpy Hill that we cleared last session. And over here is where we found the Mauler and... Or no, it was a Slayer. It was a Slayer in Baird's other scene. Alright, so now we're going to make our way over to the right wall. I think I want to explore the valley that connects to the swamp before I do anything else. Just a moment. Thinking. I'm pretty sure we passed these trees before. I already went through this pass. We passed the pass. Yeah, that's where the golem was. Okay, we'll go over here. Anyway. So yeah, the aura spells got nerfed. The trapping spells are getting nerfed. What else? The debuffs. I'm putting Stupidity and Debilitation and Clumsiness back to their former functionality, where they can hit gradually more targets as the spell progresses. And to counterbalance that, I'm going to be adjusting the enemy's stats so that there are fewer or no cases where they can be killed by having their stats debuffed. We probably talked about this once before too, but let me refresh your memory. How about that? That was a weird stutter. Why did I do that? Dankin bats. Ew. So, like, whenever an enemy's stat drops below 0, even if it's not health, that enemy becomes paralyzed. The same is true of heroes. This can absolutely happen to people, too. But, like, if you cast Stupidity on a monster and their intelligence hit 0 or negative, they would not be able to act anymore in combat. They would just stand around until the end of the battle. You can still hit them, but they couldn't hit you or take any actions. And if an entire group of enemies is paralyzed like that, you can kind of spam through the turns and eventually the combat will end on its own. The game will just realize, oh, they're all dead. Quote-unquote dead. And this was a real problem with Stupidity, because a lot of enemies are not that smart. And you could just go through the original game with a high-ranking Stupidity spell and wipe entire groups. Definitely the most efficient way to speedrun, but not so fun from, like, a challenge perspective. So what I ended up needing to do is to go through the database and make sure all of these enemies had stats that were high enough such that that could not happen. In the case of Stupidity, all that meant is I had to raise intelligence, and that's not a big deal. Most enemies don't even need their intelligence stat, so they don't use it. Like, the applications of intelligence in combat are such that it only affects two things: spellcasting and the use of ranged weapons. So, by increasing the intelligence of the enemies all to 21, which is the point beyond which they can be killed, that way. It prevents them from ever suffering stupidity at no cost to, like, the game's balance. Well, I mean, it'll affect the things that do that stuff, like I said. Like, all the bandits that use bows and throw things, they'll have more accurate attacks. But that's fine, right? Because then they stay relevant longer, they do more damage in battle. And for enemies that cast spells, like trolls now and cyclopses, it'll help them get their spells out more quickly, which is good for them too, because you've seen them struggling to hit me with their things. The real problems are guys like these, who have damaging attacks, or damaging spells rather, because intelligence does not just affect your chances of successfully casting a spell, it affects the damage the spell does too. I originally learned this lesson whenever I was rebalancing the crab people, because I had originally boosted their intelligence to 20 just out of principle, because they suck so much. They're really bad at casting spells in the original game. Their intelligence is only 10. I had doubled it for them. But whenever I was doing a playthrough with them, I was getting dunked on by those guys, because they would hit with their spells very reliably, and they would hit with them very frequently. Well, they got a lot of attacks because they have decently high dex, and they were doing a lot of damage with the spells. Like, it was ludicrous how much damage they were doing. So, for enemies that have spells that deal damage, it was a little trickier to justify giving them 21 intelligence. And I've avoided doing it wherever I can. Or at least, I've been balancing it out a little differently to compensate. Like, again, using the crab people as an example. Normally, in the original game, and in Aidyn Plus up until now, their spell rank was 3 on Earth Might and Lightning, and their intelligence was 15, and I felt that was okay. But if we want to prevent them from being killed by stupidity, they need at least 21. So what I did was I gave them the stat, their intelligence is 21 now, and I reduced the ranks of their spells down to 1. I might also need to take a look at their wizard rank. I don't know what it is. I'm pretty sure wizard rank affects spell damage as well, but I don't know that for sure. It might only affect, like, chances of casting and magic crits. But basically, since I boosted their intelligence to which would raise their attack, I lowered their spell ranks to decrease it again. That was the idea. No idea how that's going to pan out. We're just going to have to see. That'll be a testing session someday. But yeah, I did that for any enemies that use damaging spells as their core thing, unless they were already really close to 21 intelligence in the first place. Like, I had boosted giant skeletons to 20 intelligence anyway, and their damaging spell is Crushing Death. So, like, ticking it up to 21 from 20 was not a big deal and did not require any additional nerfs, you know? But anyway, almost every monster in the game is now smart enough not to be killed by stupidity. The only exception are the goblins in the early game, because I decided they didn't need it for a few reasons. First off, they're in the early game, which means that they're some of the first enemies you're going to be fighting, and you're probably not going to have access to... Well, you're going to have access to the stupidity spell, but you're not going to have access to the ranks you need to really use it to annihilate their brains. And the other part of the reason I decided not to boost their intelligence all the way up is because Goblin Sergeants know the Brilliance spell, and if they're already just super smart, it kind of defeats the purpose of them having a spell that makes them smarter. So I was like, these guys can slide with less intelligence, it'll be fine. And while we're on the subject of the early ranks of spells, I guess I should describe exactly how these spells work to put it in perspective. So whenever you cast a debuffing spell, I might have mentioned this once before, but it's probably lost somewhere in the LP. We'll just review it, you know? How these spells work is, well, their description says they lower the stat by 2 per rank, and that is true. Sorry, I don't want to take a drink. You guys bite hard, I hate you. It lowers them by 2 per rank, yeah. But what they don't tell you is that your wizard rank supersedes your spell rank in that regard. If you were a level 1 wizard with level 10 stupidity and you cast it on something, that creature is not going to lose 20 intelligence. They're going to lose 2 intelligence, because it looks at the wizard rank first and then the spell rank second. On the flip side, if you were a rank 10 wizard casting rank 1 stupidity, it would still only go down by 2, because the spell's rank was only 2. So in other words, to get full effect of a debuffing spell, the wizard rank and the spell rank need to match. So if you want to drop an enemy's intelligence by 20. If you want to drop an enemy's intelligence by 20, you would need rank 10 stupidity as a rank 10 wizard. And the really nice thing about this is that wizard is a very difficult skill to raise. It's one of the most... No, I think it is the most costly skill to raise, alongside alchemist. Oh, we didn't get anything fancy out of this chest. This is another chest you can get the witch ring out of in the original, and it shares the female dryad drop chart, which still carries the witch ring. But we didn't get lucky, and I'm not going to spam it. What was I saying? Oh god, yeah, the spell rank thing with the debuffs and all that fun stuff. All the debuff spells work the same way, too. So, clumsiness, debilitation, stupidity, they affect intelligence, dexterity, and strength, and they all work the same way. You've got to have the wizard ranks to back up the spell ranks, which is basically perfect. And especially important for the other 2 stats, because there are other things that are harder to justify. Like, intelligence may not affect most of the enemies in the game, and a lot of them can get by with 21 intelligence, no sweat. This is the top of the path that leads back to the swamp. You remember? No? Well, screw you, buddy. Anyway. Yeah, intelligence is not important for most enemies, but strength and dexterity definitely are. They are major factors in game balance. And I can't just give everything 21s across the board and call it a day. I mean, I could. It would probably make the game kind of challenging. But I think some things would be better off not having that. And I need to look at how the adventure is paced, and like what parts of the game these enemies should or would be relevant for. And we just kind of gotta settle on numbers that seem right. I don't remember where I made clumsiness available in this mod. I want to say it's fairly early. It's a pretty low-ranking star spell. But yeah, dex is important, and strength is important. And for the late-game enemies, I was fine boosting them to 21, because they definitely need those stats to keep up with the heroes by then. But for earlier game enemies, things like wolves, for example, it's more of a question. Like, wolves have pretty low strength. I think it was only like 11 when I looked. And I have gotten my butt chewed by enough wolves to say I don't think they need any additional attack power. They are quite tough enough as it is, thank you. But, once again, wolves are early game enemies, so it's less of a problem that they don't have 21 strength to keep them from being killed by this spell. Like I said, they have 11 strength, so that means you would need rank 6 debilitation and rank 6 wizard to kill them with that spell. And that's just not something you're going to have during the time frame where wolves are relevant. Cast the dragon flamethrower. So wolves, we don't have to worry about boosting their strength any higher than it already is. Dexterity, however, it's another problem. because armor affects dexterity, and all enemies have armor now because I gave it to them. I need to take a look at the dex penalties on all armor that all the enemies are wearing, and compensate them for it, basically. Like, I can't just give something 21 dex and be like, well, it's covered, clumsiness can't kill it. And I did test this to make sure it was accurate. If an enemy had 21 dexterity as its stat, and their armor had a dex penalty, I will say 3, their effective dexterity is 18. Which means if you cast a rank 9 clumsiness spell at wizard rank 9, they would still be paralyzed by the spell and effectively killed. A lot of monsters in this game could afford to go faster anyway, so in a way it's just as well. But once again, gotta be careful. Some things are justified at being slow, such as ogres. I boosted Ogre's dexterity by a pretty substantial margin when I was last poking around in the editor, but I'm going to reevaluate it as I go through the armors, because it's important. I'm gonna camp, because it's late. We're almost done in these hills. Are you excited? I don't know why you wouldn't be. So... You remember how I said the anus of the mountain is kind of a very handy landmark? We're gonna find out why in just a second here. I think I need to kill a pack of hellhounds down here first. You over here, hellhounds? Did I kill you already? Pretty sure this is where they are. Oh, hellhounds! I know you exist! There they are! Let's deal with these guys, and then I'll keep blathering on about stuff. Go away, dogs. Alright. Trying to gather my thoughts here about the other stuff I need to say. I know one thing I haven't addressed yet. Stellar Gravity. This spell, I think I mentioned, has similar effects to Clumsiness. They both restrict movement. But I did a test to see the nature of how that is done, and I basically confirmed my suspicions. Clumsiness, as the spell says, reduces the target's dexterity, and therefore that reduces how far they can move and how often they can move. But Stellar Gravity does not lower dexterity. It restricts movement in an artificial way. So, what that means is Clumsiness is basically a better spell than Stellar Gravity, because it has 2 effects instead of just 1. But I decided to vary up how they work to balance them in light of each other's existence. See, the reason I wanted to hold off on blathering more is because I knew we would have to address the anus of the mountain real quick here. This landmark is more than just a big old black smudge on the side of the earth. If you go all the way up here, this sheer rock face, there's a cave. And some banditos, too. Hello there, bandit. Still only human rogues over here, huh? They could have justified putting nothing but human renegades and other tough bandit units out here. Because this is basically the pinnacle of bandit culture that we're about to be entering into here. This cave is their lair, more or less. And you do see all the toughest kinds of bandits here, but you don't really see them in endgame volumes like they should. Like, these are the same chumps we were fighting on the road to Port Said, and that's just sad. But there's some fairly interesting stuff inside there, too, so... we get to take a look at it once we get rid of these nerds. I need Aileron to cast Aura of Death upon them. Man, they're hitting hard now. 73 for that? Brenna, you're a beast. Okay, so Stellar Gravity. What I decided to do with it is make it such that it can affect all targets within its range. Haven't decided what range I want to give it just yet, but that will be its distinguishing feature from the Clumsiness spell, rather. Because where Clumsiness, you need to rank up more and more for it to affect more targets, Stellar Gravity will always affect all targets within range. Which is exactly what it needs, I think. And that will help with the enemies that I gave that spell to as well. Hey, Donovan, you're in the way! Wait on. Idiot. Was that really all I had to say about Stellar Gravity? I guess it is. Jeez, that was almost 100! That's crazy! Were there any other spells I needed to talk about? I don't really think so. Oh, there was a little bit more I wanted to say about Wall of Bones and Frozen Doom. As if I didn't talk enough about them before, right? Basically, one of the major problems I had while I was making custom spell sets for the enemies is that their priorities are a little whack sometimes. Basically, if they had targets within range that they could cast trapping spells on, they always prefer to use their trapping spells before, like, spells that do damage or whatever. So if you had an enemy, like the wights in this mod, where they have Wall of Bones and Crushing Death, they're only going to use Crushing Death if there are no targets that they can hit with Wall of Bones nearby. And that can be fairly common if you run Aileron in there and run everybody else away. They're going to cast Crushing Death on Aileron. But now that Wall of Bones and Frozen Doom only affect certain aspects, it's going to make those spells come out a little more often, because there will be fewer heroes they need to cast it on, or you'll be at risk of having a lot of heroes trapped. So that works out a little better, especially for the Chaos Toughs, like the Chaos Lieutenant and the Chaos Major, whom I had given Frozen Doom and Wall of Bones to. The Lieutenant's still no Wall of Bones, and I think they have White Fire. And the Chaos Majors, they have Frozen Doom and Fireball. I think that was actually true in the original as well. Bandit Chieftain, why aren't you a Bandit Kingpin? Like why, man? Why? So yeah, this adjustment to those spells should work out for those guys, because they're less likely to get stuck in a loop of trying to trap everybody that you already cast Mirror on or something. And they'll be more likely to use their actual damaging attacks. They ought to hurt pretty bad. That's a lot of experience. All this junk. Leave the healing potions.